Let's talk about Microsoft Teams and external users, one of the main topics in all of my projects and also in our discussions in the community. And let's have a view on external user, on contracts and how you work with external users. What about copyright law and all of these things? So very, very interesting. I have a view on the chat, but I think also Peter have a view. So let's start and talk a little bit about it. At first, yeah, you know me in the from the preparing. Yeah, my name is Raphael Köllner. I'm working currently for the BDO Digital as an executive consultant for the compliance and security department and for these topics, all of this, and also yeah, external is one of the topics I'm working every day with. And moreover, before I worked for Microsoft and also for some other Microsoft partners and also for some law companies, middle market and enterprise law companies. So I'm combining the law and the IT, and I'm very happy to be here because I'm also a community guy, and you see it SharePoint Saturday, Teams Fest, Teams Community Day, Azure Saturday, Office 365 community in Germany, and all of this. So I'm very, very happy that we have this community today, as this community conference today with all of these great speakers. And you know it from other speakers. I'm also one of the MVPs for Office Apps and Services in the same category, and also for now 8 years, and also Windows Insider since 6 years. And since last year, I'm one of the Microsoft Media Directors. These are around 100 people around the world who speak directly with the leadership team of Microsoft and is handling the business way with Microsoft and giving feedback and helping with the strategies and all of this. So really great. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I make steps and have some time at the end. And also you can write me an email, Twitter me, and no, I can't answer at the same time while I speak, but after it, I can answer also on Twitter or write your questions in the chat. That's also fine. And I have some websites. You can have a look at my website, for example, and that's okay. So have a look on the clock. We need some time for this session. So let's start. And before I start, one of the main things for every conference, rate the sessions, rate the conference, giving feedback to the conference, to the conference organizers, what they can do better, what helps, and all of this is very, very important. So thank you very much, and please rate this session and also the other sessions, and giving feedback also to the conference owners. And yeah, my feedback, very awesome. Thank you, Peter. Directly feedback. Okay, let's start with the session. I think about, okay, we make 4 big topics and also a little bit Q&A at the end, or Q&A, you can ask questions also after every topic. That's also okay. I will have a look at the chat. So let's start really, really smoothly with the introductions and a little introduction about guests. Then let's talk about the architecture of external users and guests in Microsoft Teams, what they can see, what is the wizard to invite, and we talked about to invite guests and to kick them out. So both ways, and what happened with the guest account, for example. And then we talked a little bit about options, how you can monitor a guest. And also in every part, we talk a little bit about licensing. What do you need to control, for example? What are the options for invitation? Is the Microsoft way the perfect way to invite guests, or is it better to create your own forms or use a bot? So you create your own way to invite guests and handle guests. So let's talk a little bit about it. But at first, let's make a little introduction and talk about guests. You see here, I found this wonderful picture in the Microsoft picture gallery out of the Office or PowerPoint gallery. So you see all of my pictures here are out of the Office gallery. And this is one of my favorite ones to talk about guests. Guests in Microsoft is like this, or guests in my team. I have a bar and I have guests, they coming in, they, or for example, my customers ordered some products, or I'm working together with the team of the restaurant to creating new products like new burgers and new special barbecue sauce and all of this. So it can be for example, for middle market, you see here, you have guests and a lot of guests in your tenants, and they are walking in your restaurant, they're going out, and normally you can say that's for teams. It's very easy to invite guests and to kick them out, and we have a lot of guests. They are only for a week in your tenant, for example, or only for a month, and then you forgot that you have guests in your tenant, for example. So it's very interesting to see what happened with guests and how the cooperation is rising up, and so you have more and more guests and more different guests. So normally, think before the COVID crisis and some years ago, we have, for example, we know we have for around 20 guests in our tenants. And today we have, for example, 200 guests, and we don't know exactly in which team the guests are. Do we need the guests in our tenant, and all of these questions? And this were the questions we discussed, or I discussed also every day with my CISO and also with my data privacy officer in my company. And this is also a very interesting topic for you today, that we talked about it before, because guests in Microsoft Teams, they can a lot, and I think all of you are guests in one of the teams, for example, in these Teams Fest team as a speaker, or you are guests in other community teams, or you are guests in the Microsoft tenant. So you see, you have in different teams, for example, different rights, but especially for teams, you are invited and you can add files, you can edit files, you can delete files. Mostly you can create channels or you delete channels, and you are handling your all of what you do in the teams like a member, or nearly like a member. And you see also the tenant members, the teams members. If you are invited in a lot of teams, you see more and more members, and so that is very interesting. That mostly it's very natively to work, and also you can use, for example, OneDrive to synchronize the files. That's also possible today, and also with some new announcements that are not announced on this Ignite, but hopefully on next Ignite, we see more and more invest from Microsoft into guests and Microsoft Teams. So more than private and normal challenge channels. But have a look at guests. Normally, and then in the little introduction, you see, okay, cooperation is the key. So everyone in a company, mostly we have an external, like Microsoft partner or anyone else from other companies. In my tenant, we are working together as a team. We have at the end working results, for example, papers, for example, also IP, also things that are protected from copyright. And also, yeah, we are working together, and mostly we are working together in a project in Microsoft Teams, or we are working together in a department team. And very, very important is, data handling and data governance in these parts. So we have to talk about in which tenant team we are working. So you have, for example, here the internal and external, and you have two tenants, for example, your tenant for the internal, and we have a tenant for the external one. For example, they have also Microsoft Teams and Office 365, and you want to work together. Then you have the first decision in which tenant we want to work together. So mostly for me, as I work as a consultant, I said, okay, let's work in the tenant of the customer. In other parts, as I'm working for my company, I said, okay, let's work in my tenant. So every time, and I know a lot of these discussions that partner companies have in these moments. So they're answering, and if they know the architecture of Teams, they have a lot of discussion in which tenant we work together. So because this is very important, because you have here the project and you see the line, you're working together, for example, the internal. So in my company, in the Contoso in company together, and all of the things what the external are creating, files, knowledge, chats, and all of this is in this tenant. All of the compliance and security tools, including communication compliance, is only in this tenant. It's available only in this tenant, only for this user in this tenant. It's not, there are no cross-tenant functionality. And this is one what I'm talking a lot of with the product group, and there's a very good reason why all of these functionality and also security and compliance tool are only working, and also audit logs, for example, are only working in your tenant. Is yes, that's your tenant, that's your data, and you don't have a right to get the data out of the other tenant. And the other tenant is, yeah, it's like I have an example. It's like, for example, you have different countries. We have Germany, France, and all of this. And France don't want that you see all of the telemetry and diagnostic data and also all of the copyright protected results out of France in Germany, or Germany don't, or the France people want the information from Germany, and Germany don't want that everyone out of other companies want to see everything in their country, what happened there. So that's nearly the same. No one wants to see, or everyone wants to see the other tenant, but the other tenant said, okay, no, we don't want, so you don't want to share all of your information, diagnostic data, telemetry, files, and all of this. So this is very, very important at first, and this is a very good hint, to have a contract. In which tenant we work? Who are the rights of the external ones? For example, the right to extract the data every month as a day, or do you, the external, if you have a process with the internal guys, for example, that the internal guys extracted the data out of Teams every 2 weeks and sent them as a zip file or as a sharing folder in SharePoint to the external ones, or the external one said, okay, we copy it to another team in our tenant or whatever. So it's very, very important to talk about what happened with the telemetry data, what happened with the work results, what happened with the files you produce together, often together in one tenant, and what happened also, for example, when an external user have a harassment language, and also, for example, typing in the project, the internal one is an asshole, for example, and all of this. Is it okay to extract these data and send it to the manager of the external guy? So they has to talk with this guy. What happened with all of these information? It's normally very clear for your own company, but what happened with the external ones? So very, very interesting. And I see the first judgments in Germany in this area, and more complex and really complex contracts, partner contracts, or the contracts which try to organize what happened in which cases, what we can do in these areas. So very, very interesting. And this is, my longer introduction. So this is the questions we have to talk about it. And let's start one more, guests and externals. And I talked a lot about externals and what happened when the external is in your team, for example, or you are an external in the other tenant, about the compliance and all of this. So now have a look which categories of externals or guests do you have. Normally, we say guests are Microsoft accounts, Gmail accounts, Facebook accounts. So everything with a Microsoft ID or a federation part. Then we have classic external users. External users are, for example, users with an Office 365 account, an AAD account. So we have a typical B2B scenario. It's also possible that on-prem users, for example, they have only an Exchange server on-prem. That's since last Ignite last year. They announced that they can have a self-service or process. You can add them to Teams. and they will create an AAD account. Same with a lot of third-party tools, like I'm using, for example, yeah, it's also possible with Gmail that the Gmail user is creating an AAD account, or we have a lot of third-party email tools like Novell, for example, and all of this. They create also an AAD tenant in the background. Often the external don't know that they have an AAD account now, and when the company then starts to implement it, Office 365 and their own Active Directory, they announce they see, or they can see in combination with Microsoft, oh, there's an AAD in your tenant, and the domain, for example, is connected. So they have to summarize the different Active Directories. So that's one of the very interesting things. Then internal, external, I called it internal, external, because it's an external guy, for example, from a service provider or from Microsoft partner in your company. They help you in some projects, and they get an internal account. So a classic account like your employees account out of your tenant. But here is very important. Often you can use, well, that's what I do, use a dynamic group, so that every external member which has an internal account has restricted rights. For example, only the public internet part, only the service portal, but no more rights to access to Teams and also to files. So if you give an account to an external, it's very important to restrict the access to Teams and to other parts. So this is what you have to think about it. But for example, it's a project of 2 days, and then you know, okay, this is what I have to limit the internal account, that we can handle an internal account as an external one. And this is also a really great one. And then we have the typical external one as the B2C user. And yeah, identity protection is announced also for B2C users. I'm very happy about it. And we have the anonymous ones. For example, they come in these Microsoft Teams Classic meetings with an in private browser, give you the name. So they don't need an account to come into a Microsoft Teams meeting. They are joining a live event. And also, for example, mainly we have anonymous sharing links in OneDrive out of the team, for example. Then we have also some anonymous user, and these users are red because, mostly you don't know a lot about them, and you can't handle them really nice. So it's better to have a B2B, an external one, then an internal external one, so you give them a full account, and then the guest one. So the right parts on this side are the best ones if you are working in a traditional way with Microsoft Teams together. And this is really working really nice. For example, in this internal external account, so we have an account out of the tenant. It's mostly for high regulated companies like insurance companies, and also the finance topics like for banks and finance institutes and all of this, and mostly for the typical retailers and all of this. They are switching to the external ones because they don't need to pay a license, and the B2B connection with another Office 365 tenant is better and will be better also in the future. For example, to link the OneDrive client and use the OneDrive client to sync the files out of the Teams library in your Windows Explorer desktop or in your library. So that's really great, and will be more, and we will see some more announcements on the next night, but I can't talk about it because it's not announced on this night. But Microsoft is working in this area on very great announcements for Microsoft Teams, or Microsoft Teams only, but I can't talk about it. Oh, it's not allowed. So next one, and this is architecture thing, and I have a look very shortly to the questions. No questions, no questions. Okay, no questions, so I go forward. We will have a deeper look into external and guest users, and I hope every one of you have a look into the Azure Active Directory, where you see the external ones, and for example, you see here an external Active Directory. This is Office 365 hero.de. This is one of my demo users. That's Julia Meyer. They are invited, and you see here accept the invitation, and they are a part of my, for example, demo tenant, and she, in this part, she can work together in Microsoft Teams with me. I can add her into other teams. I can add her, for example, also to groups and to Yammer communities and all of this. And that's very interesting. You have different status of external. You see here status typical, they accepted the invitation. You have different status, for example. Also, you see the user are invited but don't accept. So you can resend the invitation email, for example, and you see different status, for example, external Azure Active Directory ones as an external account, and Microsoft accounts see, for example, Outlook.com and Hotmail accounts. You see Gmail accounts also, or O2P authentication. You see Facebook, this is really new. And you see on-prem, this is also external Active Directory, but you see this, hopefully in my tenant, I see that there's also possible to see that is the art of the external guest, and then the status is, for example, accept the invitation on invitation process, but not really more. And often I want to see more information about in which status the external user is, in which part of the invitation process. This is possible, for example, with PowerShell and also with Microsoft Graph to have more information about in which area or in which part of the invitation process the external user is in this moment. But we will talk a little bit later about these. One of the great things also you have to know the invitation methods and also the delete methods of the guest. In the beginning, you can invite guests out of the Microsoft 365 Admin Center also, and then edit them to a team. This is not possible anymore. You have to go into the Azure portal, and you need, for example, the rights. There's a typical role for guest inviters. So for me, in the tenant, it's best practice to delete that guests can invite, that member can invite, and only people with a role for guest invitation can invite, and for example, can invite via the Azure portal, or you have your own portal of like a bot or a forms or a SharePoint site. It's also possible. Or you say, okay, everyone can invite instead of guests, but every member of my tenant can invite, and that's only a part of the Microsoft wizard. You type in the email address and then said, okay, email address, that's the user guest, put enter, and then the guest is invited. And yes, it is possible, and that's one of the most questions in this area. Yes, it is possible to change the name of the guest which you invited, but it can be from 3 to 7 days that the name is changed in Microsoft Teams. So you can change the name of the guest, for example, and also the name you see in Teams. For example, in the Azure portal, all the guests can change the name for himself or for herself in the portals, for example, my sign-ins, my groups, and my accounts, and they can log into this portal and change the name, for example, also, or use the Microsoft Teams options to handle their username, and they can change, but this change can need 3 to 7 days. 7 days was in the COVID crisis, so currently I have around 2 to 3 days that they change the name. So you have also more options, and also one is the self portal that you invited the guest, and the guest, for example, make all of the needs itself or herself, himself, and then, for example, type in the username, type in the password, type in a new password, and all of this, and then you have a self portal to invite people in your tenant, also into Microsoft Teams. The most of you will use the second one, typical in Microsoft Teams, invite the guest, and ready. It's also possible via your bot or a frame with Microsoft Graph and also with PowerShell, but the most of you will use, I think, the second one. Why it's not the best one, we'll tell a little bit later. Delete methods is also delete a user out of the Azure portal. There was a GDPR dashboard. It's called today user privacy. and there's also an option to delete users. You can use the access review. That's an Azure AD P2 license requirement, and there you can check, for example, every group leader or every group owner of a team has to check the guests every 3 months. It's an automatical process, and they just said, okay, this guest is okay, this guest is not okay, and after a period, the guest will be blocked, and then as an administrator, you can delete it all blocked guests. This is also a cool feature, but Azure AD P2. And also PowerShell and Microsoft Graph. This is really clear, I hope. And also Microsoft Graph on Ignite. This is really cool. You have a new connection to the Azure Active Directory and a connection to PowerShell. So via Graph, you can use PowerShell, and also with Graph, you can edit all of your guests in your team and also in your groups. And one of the things is, status of a guest. I told you, invitation, access, block, and delete. In deletion, they have 30 days also, like the other members, and you can restore also the guests. Very interesting in this part, the 5-to-1 rule is a limitation for guests. And the quick questions, which of our countries in the COVID crisis in the last, my information is from the beginning of September, so in the last 6 months, which of the countries invited the most guests to Teams? Any idea? You can type it in the chat, for example. Which country? Germany. Alexander, perfect. Germany. Anyone more? I give a hint. It's in Europe. France, very good. UK. Okay, I wait 20 seconds more. Sweden. Okay. Spain, Norway. It's not in this moment. Netherlands. Netherlands is very, very hot. Okay. Thank you very much. It is Italy. Italy is a region worldwide with the most guests, and they invited. You have one user and around 5 to 10 guests for every user in Teams. So that is really, 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 really crazy. So in the statistics, you have Italy, and then you have Netherlands, and Germany is only 1-to-1 to 1 to 0.5, so not really crazy. So Italy is the tenants which invited the most guests, and that's very, very interesting because we have this 5-to-1 rule. If you have a look in the documentation, limit for guests that you invited, and if I have a look a little bit deeper in the documentation, is limit for guests. They're using, they need licensing products, for example, and that's why for every of my customers, and also I said let's check the 5-to-1 rule, because I'm using conditional access for every guest that they need MFA. And if you said, okay, I'm using conditional access, that everyone of the external who comes in your tenant, that's the same was Microsoft activated, for example, for their tenant. You get a phone call and have to type, you have to type something and say then, okay, that's me, and then you can end the call. And the system said, okay, that's part of MFA. And the system said, okay, that's you. You have access to Microsoft Teams. And this feature with conditional access is one of the licensing services. So we have 5 guests which using licensing services, which you need a license for. And you have one member of your tenant which have 5 guests. So, but out of my view, out of the last 3 years, I don't know that Microsoft Account Manager comes and said, okay, you have too much guests, because I'm living in Germany and the most of my customers are in Germany and also in Europe, but I don't have a customer in Italy. So maybe in Italy, the Microsoft Account Manager comes and said, okay, you have too much guests in your tenant, but I don't heard about someone who said, okay, we have a lot of guests and you have to pay, or you need more licensing ones. And this is the last interesting thing here, 5-to-1 means these one user must be a real user, or you only need the license. For Microsoft, you only need the license, so you don't you need the paid license in your tenant. You don't need to connect it with the people, or the license don't need in use. So I have only one where we said, okay, Microsoft don't say anything, but we bought 10 users, 10 licenses user more, so that we are in this rule and we don't get in trouble if a Microsoft guy is looking at the Office 365 tenant. And this must be really clear for all of you. Microsoft see statistics about your tenant, how much guests and how much and which licensing payment. And this is a part of the contract. If you have a look in the DPA attachment, there's a sentence that Microsoft is proceeding customer data for their business. And one part of your business is licensing. And yeah, this is a part of licensing. So Microsoft is proceeding customer data in this part. So yeah, they see what you do. And there are also warnings, I know, but yeah, I can talk about more what they do. Okay. For external users, for me, every time for teams using MFA Call, for example, so they don't need the app. Call is the option for everyone via Conditional Access. So every external guest need MFA so that we know that is really the person. So we can also make, and this is advantage of a call. We have only an audio call often, that you can make it also on a classic phone. You don't need a smartphone. Call is working for the most phones. And yeah, mostly I also discussed about tokens that I see, and also the app, so that you have the Microsoft authentication app. A lot of Microsoft partners using this with their customers. Yeah, conditional access, block access only in web. That's what I see also very often, that guests only have access to the Teams web app, and also the reports about the guests they are valid in and all of this. And this is a very great hint using sensitivity labeling, the new sensitivity labeling for unified groups, so that we can handle the life cycle of a team, the life cycle of external users in a team and the team with external users. Really great with sensitivity labeling that you can see, for example, if there's a team with the internal label or internal flag, you can't invite guests. It's very easy. You don't need any PowerShell scripts for every team. You can use sensitive labeling for these options. So next one, and then then I will have a look to the questions. Next and very interesting one is Microsoft Teams data about external guests. And this is one of the main questions I discussed with the working councils, for example. What happened when our employees working in other tenants? Which information the other tenants has about our employees? And it's the same thing on the other side. Which information do you have? And very interesting, for example, for HR interviews via Microsoft Teams, which is the best practice to make an interview with an external member in a process of a job offer. And this is very, very interesting. So let's have a look a little bit deeper, and you see the slide. In Azure Active Directory, you can typically you have the name and the email address, but you can add all of the typical information like department, manager, telephone number, and all of this. This is possible, it's not in default. For me, it's very important that it's in default. For example, company is a very big and good information, also telephone number. So for my external guests, I have all of these information, also the manager information. You remember these asshole announcement on Teams, you need the contact the manager to talk with them and to talk with the other company what happened with these member in your team, especially block the member and then talk with the guy. On the other side, member of groups, Yammer, for example, Yammer communities, teams, and also unified groups. Also member of distribution lists, and all of this. So that's a part for teams, yeah, groups and teams. For teams, also very interesting, the one-to-one chats and the files in a one-to-one chat in another tenant is stored in the Exchange folder and also in the OneDrive of the tenant user. So the chats in the external tenant isn't stored in the external mailbox. Same for SharePoint sites of a team. It's in the other tenant. And also you have a lot of special rights and access rights. And this is very, you have in a part, you have it very different for every team. And then you see these log files of what the external did and do in the tenant. And this is also logged like an internal one. And if you activated Microsoft Cloud App Security, it's also very awesome that you see all the external users. So you know what the external user did and do. And it's very interesting that, for example, if you're sharing something out of Microsoft Teams, for example, also as an anonymous link, that's also possible to share. You see the anonymous users which have access to your SharePoint library or to your OneDrive, and also to your Teams SharePoint library with Microsoft MCAS. So if you opened a SharePoint link on a website, for example, you want to have the slide decks, it's also registered, and you can see with Microsoft MCAS, for example, also very easily which external users downloaded the slides out of the website. So it's very, very interesting that the tenant collected a lot of information about the external users. The same, and there are a lot of users, including the name of the PC, the IP address, the audio card driver, how long the external user is staying in the meeting, is the meeting telemetry. And there are a lot of around, I counted it, around 35 parameters. They are registered about external users in the meeting. So in this time, you joined this meeting, for example, with your company account. The owner of the tenant of this meeting knows everything about you. The only chance is to join, and now don't leave this meeting at this moment. The only chance is to join with the in-private browser and a proxy and give you a name like elephant or like this to join a meeting with an anonymous or with a way that the other 10 don't collect so much information. So that is a very, very interesting thing. So often I see here in this, if I talk with the working council, that's the working council forbid and restricted on a technical way and in a operational way that external that the employees are allowed to work in other tenants. That is more and more, and I see more and more that the external collaboration in other tenants is not allowed. And now we have a challenge how work together when we can't leave our tenant. Very, really interesting. So I have a look in the chats. There are some questions. Really great questions around external access and meetings. If we have company01.com, yeah, that's a domain, into your allowed domain list and want to invite users from the company to meeting hosted by us in a company .02, so another domain, do they need to add company 02 into their allowed domain list? Yeah, there are two answers. One, if you are really restricted and you have a restricted configuration in Azure AD and you don't allow anonymous join in your meetings, then you need to add the domain. And you need to add the domain to the domain list. If you allowed in the Teams Admin Center an anonymous join to Teams meetings and an external anonymous join, then it's possible. So this is really a great question. So thank you very much. In my configuration, I have a very restricted configuration. Yes, I have to add, and I have to know the people out of the other company. So company 2, yes, that's possible. Nikki, I thought the access review only removed users from groups and did not delete B2B accounts. Yes, that's why I said they removed and block. And that's why I said at the end you need a script to delete all blocked accounts, so the accounts stay after access review. This is one of the 2 wishes I have to the product group. The first one is, yes, we need a delete of the user, not only a block and remove from groups. And the second one, I need more information. Access review shows only the name of the external, and I need more information like in which tenant, in which group, who is the owner of the guest, and all of this. So thank you. That's right, Nikki. Why would you only let guests use Teams on web and not on the full client? This is, for example, for high regulated companies. It's because in the web, I can restrict it that they can't download the file, for example, with sensitivity labeling, that they only can see and participate. But with sensitivity labeling and all of this, they can't download the file on the PC. And also, if you install the client, you also have some telemetry, diagnostic information, and more information on the client of the external guy. And often we don't want it. We only want that they have access to web and the web browser. And when the web session is closed, every data will be deleted. So we have only the data out of the web sessions and not all of the data they collected from the client, for example, and from the client. And when you have access to the client and to the data of the client, the telemetry and diagnostic, you can get a lot of information, and often we don't want and said, okay, only web. Yeah, it's not the best one for the guests. I know. Okay. I was finished my session in this moment, and then I asked the rest of the question. Thank you very much for all of the questions. Because of the time, I speed a little bit up. Licensing and external, yeah, we talked about the external guests. They are licensed via the invited users. Yes, you see often Teams free license. You don't need a Teams free license for guests, and there are also some administration Teams licensing you see sometimes. This is only for your user. For example, you have a user, they have only an Exchange account, and you invite it into Teams, then the internal user, and then the user get these administration or Teams business administration licensing. But this is not a paid licensing, it's only licensed part of the free licensing program that the internal user have. So for guests, no, you don't need, but the only chance is if you have an account, so the external internal one, I hope you remember, then you need an account for the guests or for the externals. Very important, if we talk about guests, what do you need? You need an ownership, and this is what I said, and I discussed the last 3 Ignites in my discussion rounds with all of the attendees there, and mostly, and I said it here in this moment too, we need an owner, and it must be a real person. So an owner of the external must be a real person, and the real person ownership of the external. We don't have any external in my tenants without an ownership. And this ownership, yeah, can be, for example, counted as a manager of the external, or we have an Excel sheet, for example, or for us, we created our own invited process. And in this invited process, the owner has a list of external users are connected to the people or to the employee in my tenant or the employee of the internal user. So that is very, very important. You need a natural person, not a bot or everything. They are the owner of the user, the internal user. They have the risk control of the external. They need to approve additional rights, for example, additional access rights, make the access review if you have the licensing, or do it manually. And you have to talk about lever. So, for example, the owner, the internal user A has the ownership of the external guest, and internal user A is leaving the company. So you have to talk about what happened about internal user, they leave the company. So you need to switch to another user and the ownership to another user. And that's why, for example, we created our own tool to handle all of these things. Internal and external, I think I can skip more of this. These slides are also for you. For example, you see here a Gmail account and also an internal account, what they see. And this is very, very important if you have a look at it, that the user you invited in a team can see the statistics of the team, that's fine, and see the users in the team. And only from the team, he, she is a guest from it, and you can chat. You can chat with all of the internal users in this team, but you can't chat with people outside of the team. This is very important and very important information everyone asked me. So this, but in this area, please test it. You create a Gmail account, create another test tenant, Office 365 desk tenant, and test it for your own, that you are really confidential with it and really knowing what happened with my guest and my tenant. This is one of the things I said, you have to test it before you invite guests, before you think about it to switch the parameter to yes, external guests in my teams. You have to test it, what is see directly and all of this. I did it, and I do it every 2 months because there are sometimes changes. I don't have so much time, so I get a little bit forward to invite guests. Yeah, we have in the Azure Active Directory, we talked about it. The invite role, you can restrict it. You can say that only member can invite, that guests can invite. And for me, it's best practice, only member or only people with a guest invite role can invite guests. You can also define a security group that only people in the security group can invite guests. We talked about it from the questions. Yeah, it is very awesome, and it's the only feature you can restrict it today is the domain list in the Active Directory, that only from this domain you can invite people. This is what everyone in every regulated company is using it. There are some news. I can't talk about it, but hopefully on next Ignite in March next year, we can talk about it, that we have here a better feeling and a better option to restrict a lot better with the handling with external guests and the restriction. So have a look in the Azure portal, and so yeah, it's really great. So I have 5 more slides, and then I answer the rest of the questions. This is the optimal process. If you don't think about teams, if you think about what I have to do from national regulatories, from data privacy, from IT security teams, what I need, which is the best process to invite guests. Is here very fast. Member or another guest has a request. I want to add another external user, then need the approval of the manager. Then the external users get the contracts, NDA, data privacy, terms of use. The external guest has to sign it. For example, use DocuSign, Adobe Sign-in, or that's also possible with Microsoft Graph. That was what we built, that the external user send it via email back, and the documents of the attachment will be stored in a Microsoft list. This is really cool. Then the manager can see, okay, are the contracts signed? For example, are some parts underlined, or check, in general, check the contracts. Then, after this moment, when the contracts are signed, then create the external user object in this moment, and then after it, send an external user an email with all of the information. Here are your groups and all of this. And then when the user said yes, then invited the user into the groups and sites. So we have only the object, then the invitation to teams. And at the end, we have a member control for the head of the user, or the ownershipment of the user every 3 months, or every 6 months, or every month, like you want to define the time period that you control the external. Do we need the external? Which rights has the external? Do the external need these rights and delete the external or block the external access? The Microsoft way is this. Yeah, very short. And is it okay for the regulations here? No, it's not okay. So we have to delete the classic way and For example, we can modify the classic way with Microsoft features like the self-service portal, like accept terms of use, like MFA or title management. That's a little bit better. But if you see this slide and my optimal slide process slide, yeah, that's not everything. So yeah, with the Microsoft features, it's better. So you can use the classic way. If you have a risk management and the risk manager said, okay, it's fine, it's okay, then you can use it. But the best way is, yeah, use entitled manager in terms of use. So you have to pay for the other licensing. Yeah, you have to pay with MSA and all of this. But which are the best options? The best options to create your own invitation process. For example, with the forms and an SPO library in the background and graph. Also with SPO and graph, so you have your forms as a part of the SharePoint list, for example, with the new list features. You also create a Power App with SPO and graph. You can use SPO and Azure Functions together. Also, you can use SPO, CosmoDB, and Azure Functions for it. Or you can create also a bot with a bot framework. And in combination, and it's my lovely feature, all of this in combination with sensitive labeling. And for example, we created our own tool as a combination of this, hopefully in the future also with a bot, so that we control the guests and the ownership of the guests and can see the reporting of everything, what the guests do and did in my tenant, so that we have the control of it. So that's very, very important. If you have a regulated company, that's not possible. If you have only a middle market company, or as SMB company, then yeah, okay, then you can use the classic way. For example, you don't need an E5 licensing. So, for example, for the smaller companies, if you said, okay, we don't need so high regulated invitation process, we only use accept terms of use and MFA. Here, these two and the self-service portal, that's okay with Azure DP1. So we invest into Azure DP1 and are secure and safer and compliant than before. But if you want to make it right, then you have to create your own process. And the best way is this app of your own process, put it in the navigation, in the default navigation of Microsoft Teams, so that the user say, okay, click here on this portal and we invite the guests. So there are also a lot of third-party applications in the way, for example, from some of our competitors, but they don't handle the contracts. They don't handle this. Only a government on technical way, but government on technical is not enough for compliance. You need all of the legal things too. So if you implement it away, think about it. What happened?
Excuse me,
yeah.
Raphael, we need to wind things up. I'm afraid we're running out of time and we need to get ready for the next session.
I have 2 slides.
Fantastic. If we could do the slides and then for the questions, what I'm going to do is I'll put the link to the lounge in the chat. So fantastic.
And
thank
go
you.
In the launch. Thank you. Kick it out. I think every one of you knows it and we talked about it. And also you see the administration in my slides. You will get it. Also what you can control. I hope every one of you knows it in the admin center, also via PowerShell and also via Graph. This is the other things which I want to say you can define a sensitive label only for Microsoft Teams. For example, not for email and files, only for Teams. And in this part, you can create, for example, that only a private Teams is possible and no external users are allowed. And then you see here, for example, this is internal HR, no external allowed, and you have a private team, you can create it, and you can change the label of the team, and then, for example, into a public label, and then external users are allowed. So using sensitivity labeling, using MFA, and using your own invitation process is one of the best things you can do. Last thing is monitoring and control. I hope every one of you knows it. PowerShell scripts, PowerShell script. Second, graph. Manually, Azure AD portal, sign-ins, for example, you can control a little bit. E5, we talked about Microsoft MCAS and identity protection, also for external now in new since Ignite, and you have some third-party tools like Identity One you can use. Last thing for your screenshot, you can make a screenshot of the best ways. For example, one option is sensitivity labeling for unified groups, terms of use, MFA, for Teams environment access contracts, and optional entitlement management. This is the cheapest one, and for regulated companies, deactivate the MS process, create your own process with all of the approvals, what you need, and please, in this process, at the end, create the object. The external user has to sign everything, they has to be compliant, and then create the user object in your Azure AD. This is one of the best practice, and now we change. Thank you, Peter. We change to the lobby, to the other room, so that I can answer more and more questions. And I hope you love this picture.
It's a great picture. Thank you, Raphael.
I found it, and that's why I'm very happy about it. So you post the link. If not, send me an email, and we can talk a little bit more, and I will answering the questions. And I see there are more three questions, but I can answer it here in the other room also.
Fantastic. Raphael, that was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. I'm really sorry I had to hurry you, but please do join Raphael in the lounge. I'm sure he'll be happy to take all your questions there. And brilliant session. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
I hope you learned something about externals and how difficult it can be to invite an external.
It's a challenge for sure. I learned so much. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. It's massively appreciated.